So as I share our opening words, I invite all of us to enter into a spirit of meditation and contemplation. And those who teach meditation say that the sounds that we hear in the environment are just part of that. And so the voices we might hear, I invite you to just incorporate into this time of deepening into our time and our service together. Aloha. This word speaks volumes about the Hawaiian people. While there are many meanings, depending on the context, one spiritual meaning is that I greet you and acknowledge the divine within you. Imagine how different the world would be if we each looked upon each other as a divine being growing toward full realization. Aloha. So I invite you again as we deepen into a spirit of meditation and quiet. Welcome to this place. Welcome to this place of possibility. This is love's hearth, the home of hope, a refuge for minds in search of truth unfolding, ever beautiful, ever strange. Here, compassion is our shelter. Freedom, our protection from the storms of bigotry and hate. In this place, may we find comfort and courage. Here, may our sight become vision to see the unseen, to glimpse the good that is yet to be. I am very pleased to reintroduce Lanny Sinkin. Lanny is an author, an activist, an attorney. He is an animal lover and once argued in a court of law for the rights of non-human animals. And I don't know if we'll hear about that today, but I'd like to hear more about that, saying that the court system doesn't give them a voice inherently. So he was there representing them on their behalf, which is pretty exciting and pretty full of justice. So I am really happy to welcome Lanny and to hear Lanny's reflections on this Labor Day before he heads out to return soon tomorrow morning. Welcome, Lanny Sinkin.
I appreciate the invitation to share with you all. I have a trunk full of wonderful stories, and I'll try and pick a few that get us where we're going. But first of all, before I get into that, I want to thank you for all the support that you've shown for the Lakota People's Law Project and our work to defend Chase Iron Eyes. As most of you know, the court dismissed the major charges against Chase, the inciting to riot and the criminal trespass. And if he doesn't break any state, federal, or local laws for the next 360 days, his entire record will be cleansed of any charges. We were very happy to be able to provide him with legal services and pleased at the outcome. I wish it were true for all the others. It's not true for all the others, and I'm sorry that I won't be here to share your gathering with Rattler, because certainly he deserved a better outcome than he's going to get. What I did today was to bring some offerings, and you'll see on your way out there's a bucket on the shelf by the front door that has sage in it. And as most of you know, Native Americans use sage for cleansing the energy field, particularly of your home or your business or wherever you are. And I wanted that first story to be about that sage. Chuck Banner and I went down to the Pine Ridge Reservation to visit people there, and it was my first visit. And part of that meant going by the monument where there's buried a number of people. And while I was there, I brought my flute and I played for them. And it was very much in my mind about somehow getting away from any of the negative side of that dialogue you heard earlier and getting to the positive side of forgiveness and love and release. And so it was my pleasure to play the flute over the grave. And when I finished, a man came over to me. I had noticed them off to the side. They were digging a grave. And they had mechanical equipment out there excavating the ground, and they had a pine box they were going to put into the hole that they were digging. And I had noticed them before I started playing my flute. So when I finished playing, a man came over from the gravesite and asked if I would please come play in honor for the person they were going to bury. I was kind of blown away. I just do my own thing with my flute. I don't usually go around performing services at burials. But I said I would be pleased to. So I went over and played the flute for them. And when I was done, a man came over who was not exactly part of the burial party, but was somehow related to it. And he had this huge bunch of sage. And the man who had invited me to play the flute asked to buy the sage from the man who had it. So he bought the sage, and then he turned around and gave it to me. And he said, on your journey, please share this with whoever you see. So that's from Michael, She Who Has Too Many Horses is his name. He gave me the sage, and so I brought some this morning to share with those on my journey. And I encourage you to take some and use it to cleanse. And if you're not feeling well and could use a cleansing of the space around you, just light some of the sage and let it smoke out the energy field and cleanse whatever needs to be cleansed from your particular space. And I really wanted to begin this morning with just a short flute because this has played such an important role in the story. So I'll do that, and then I'll be back. So another offering that I brought today is a limited number of copies of a book that I have just published called The Conscious Bible, and a little bit of the history behind that book. When I first came to Hawaii in 1992, I teamed up with a woman named Mary Rose Creeksman, and we opened a center, a spiritual center in downtown Hilo. Hilo's a town of about 40,000 people. And we were right on Main Street with a center called the Lightworker Center. And our vision of it was a space, basically, that we would provide for teachers and healers to come and offer classes and workshops. And we knew we were onto something when we were in there busy painting and getting everything cleaned up and ready, and the phone rang. And it was two women from Australia saying they wanted to come to the spiritual center and do an aura cleansing workshop. Well, we didn't know we were open. We had no idea how they knew in Australia that we were open, but we figured we must be on the right track because it's already happening. And it did happen for 3 years, morning, noon, and night. We had teachers and healers from all over the world that came to offer classes and workshops. And our basic rule was teach whatever you can. If you know this much, teach that much. And if you know this much, teach that much. So we had some really wonderful classes and workshops that went on there. And one of my experiences while being there was that I would go home at night and I would go to bed, and maybe 2 o'clock in the morning, I'd wake up wide awake, go down to the center, flip on the computer, and out would come a story, a complete visionary story. And obviously I didn't know the story. I was being the scribe, bringing it in, channeling it in, whatever you think about that. And they were all of a theme. And it was a theme about major transition happening on this planet and in the universe, and the role that this planet was playing in that transition. And at the end of 3 years, we were kind of burned out. We decided we were going to close the center because we just needed a break. And we did, and I just left the stories up on a website that we had for the Lightworker Center. And then some years later, I was down at Punaluu, which is one of the beautiful little beaches on the east side of our island. And I was there with a man that many people believed was the king who had come to restore the Hawaiian kingdom. And we had driven down to Punaluu just to take a break. And when I stepped out of the truck, an energy just kind of descended over me. And I looked over at the beach, and I could see grass shacks, children running around, and a woman at the edge of the water pounding poi from the taro plant. And it was a vision. It wasn't what was there in my time and my space, but I was seeing what the ancient village was that had been at that site. And then a figure walked over to me with a hood, cowl, and a robe, and handed me a scroll and said, "This is the new Bible." And I took the scroll and I put it inside me, however that happened, and then I woke up. And I looked around, and there was the king, and I said, "What was your experience?" He said, "Well, I looked over at the beach, and there were these grass shacks and these children running around and this woman pounding poi, and I was seeing the ancient village." So he and I had just the same exact vision of the past. He went on to explain what happened with him, which is a whole historical narrative that I don't have time for. But suffice it to say, he was trying to drive out some of the not so pono. Pono is a word in Hawaiian that means righteously aligned. Everything's where it should be. He was driving out some energies from kahunas that had practiced the darker magic to bring a new Hawaii back to life. So that's been part of my journey in Hawaii. And after that experience at the beach, I went back to the house where I was staying and got on the computer and stayed on the computer for 14 days. And stories were just flowing out, including an entire description of the creation process from a whole different perspective. It's a Melchizedek perspective, which is an ancient Jewish tradition. And it gave a model for how creation happens that was way beyond my understanding, even though I once had studied some physics. This was beyond that, but I just recorded it, and it's part of the book. And also parables, stories about how to transform your life and change what's happening. And also channeled messages from other realms, particularly the angelic realm and the spiritual realm in general. I'm going to jump to another part of the story because I want to be sure I cover it before I end this transmission, as it were. Part of what I was told was, go read John chapter 14, verse 16. Well, I'm not a biblical scholar and sort of a half-practicing Jewish guy who doesn't even make it always to the annual New Year's celebration at the temple. But, you know, I was raised in a Jewish family, and they were very clear about their values, and the dinner table conversation was often politics and how to make things right in the world, and that's where I learned about Tzadek, which is the principle in Judaism that is justice. And it's justice in this life for all that you encounter, and it's not about what happens in the next life. Nevertheless, I was plugged into that tradition and did learn some things from the Bible that were useful in my life. But I went and read John chapter 14, verse 16 and verse 26. And what it says there is, it's Jesus talking, and Jesus says, after I leave, I will send you another, an advocate or a comforter, who will bring my messages back to you for the purpose of teaching and for the purpose of remembering. So I tuned into that advocate energy, and things just really started to flow. It's an interesting thing. It only mentioned in the book of John, only in those verses, nowhere else. I did all my Googling and everything else to find out who the heck the advocate was. Nothing came up. So I just went with the flow and tuned into that energy and tried to provide it with a vessel to where any messages that needed to come through from the advocate, I would be happy to include. So that's another part of the book that's here. I want to tell one other story because we did mention the whales. I was in Hawaii when the U.S. Navy came to the islands to test their low-frequency active sonar on the humpback whales during their breeding and birthing season. And we in Hawaii, that's a state animal, is the whale. And we in Hawaii, particularly spiritually, have a very strong connection with the whales. And when the Navy came to their first meeting, it almost turned into a riot. that they would even think of disrupting the breeding and birthing season of the whales with their stupid sonar was more than anybody was willing to tolerate. So I just put the word out as a lawyer, let me know what's happening. And I started getting calls right away from whale watch captains who were out on their boats or shore observers who always watched for the whales to come. And they said the whales were all fleeing the test area and that there were no whales. The captains were going out and having to refund everybody's money because they never saw any whales. So this was all being done under a permit from the National Marine Fisheries Service of the United States government. And in that permit, it said if there's an abnormal absence of animals, you stop testing. So I wrote to the National Marine Fisheries Service. I told them about all the reports I was having and said they really should stop the testing. They wouldn't do anything. So I filed suit. I ended up filing 5 different suits against the sonar people. But in the midst of that litigation, I went out on a boat about 3 miles off the Hilo side of our island and was out with my friends and the boat captain. And we saw these dolphins coming, spotted dolphins. And everybody jumped in the water. And the spotted dolphins formed a circle, and they were all going like this in the same direction. We were like, what's coming? Well, here came 3 humpback whales, 2 adults and a baby. My first experience was the baby did this 360-degree barrel roll that just left me laughing so hard I had to take my snorkel out. I got back in the boat. Then I got back into the water. The energy changed completely, and suddenly the waves were slapping me out into the open ocean. And I just went on the flow with the waves and did whale calling. Just calling out the whales. And this adult surfaced right underneath me and swam at my speed, about 15 feet below me, and then went out ahead of me, turned around, came straight back at me, turned and looked me in the eye and ran his fluke over my head. And I knew that they knew what I was doing in court, and they were showing their appreciation for it, and also showing me the total mastery of their realm. The water around me didn't move when that fluke went over me. It was like a knife through hot butter. But it showed me the consciousness of these animals, and that they understood perfectly what we were doing as humans and what was going on, and what their role in it was. And so I've carried that with me as well. And then I guess the only other thing I'll share for now is, for me, politics was the soil in which my spiritual growth took place. So by engaging politically, as my parents had taught me so clearly to do, I was brought into the spiritual realm and shown things in the spiritual realm that were beyond any politics. And that has stayed with me throughout my life. So I have done things like go to court and be a lawyer. My favorite case is actually the one that Karen mentioned. I filed suit on behalf of the cetacean community versus George Bush. And this was about the sonar, but the cetacean community is the whales, dolphins, and porpoises. And I argued in the court that endangered species should have the right to standing to come into court and file suit without a human surrogate. Right now, the way the court procedure is, if you want to protect an animal that's threatened, an endangered species, you have to show that whatever's threatening them is also doing some harm to a human. So you have to get the human in there first, and then the animal can follow. And I said, this is not, the intent of the legislation. The intent of the legislation was to prevent extinctions of animals. So it's the highest possible purpose. And the animals should be able to walk into court and be represented themselves, and not have to have a human surrogate. So the judge in Honolulu didn't go for it. He dismissed the case, and I went up on appeal to the Ninth Circuit in California. So I flew into San Francisco, went to the Ninth Circuit, and there were 2 judges up on the bench and 1 judge appearing by television from Nevada, where he was sitting on a special case. So I started talking about how the Navy never prepared an environmental impact statement for the use of this sonar during threatened warfare conditions, and the chief judge said, Mr. Sinkin, wait a minute. I think the first thing we want to do is talk about standing. And the judge out in Nevada said, Mr. Sinkin, are your clients in court today? And everybody, of course, laughed. The whales were not in court. But I said, no, Your Honor, but neither are you. And, maybe someday we'll have the technology where we can talk to the whales and they can talk back, and they won't need us as intermediaries. Well, from there on, we had a very jolly oral argument about it, and they eventually said no, they wouldn't do it. But they said quite clearly it's not the judiciary's job to create new standing. It's the legislature's job. So if Congress chose to give standing to animals, that would be perfectly constitutional under Article 3. They can do that. It's just they haven't done that, and the courts were not going to do that. Well, as I say, that was my favorite case as a lawyer. I don't expect to see too many of that kind of cases going on in the future, but we'll see. And I'm actually, basically, I think, transitioning to a great extent. I'm going to lessen my involvement in law and politics and be more involved in bringing the messages from the conscious Bible to the world. And I did bring some copies of the book. I didn't know I was doing this in time to get more copies in, but there are 10 copies out there. They're my gift to this congregation. Anybody that would like one is welcome to take one. I do encourage you to take the Sage as well. And I truly appreciate all of the love and support we have received from this congregation and from generally the people of Bismarck. It's been a real pleasure to be here. I know what's underneath. There's just darkness, and it's there, but there's also really good people doing really good things. So thank you for listening.
The mountains and the hills before you shall burst into song, and all the trees of the field shall clap their hands.